Hello and welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcast for this Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. I'm your host, Louie Butko, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by longtime Hamilton sports reporter and columnist Steve Milton. Last week, Milton wrapped up a 38-year career at the Hamilton Spectator, and after moving over from the Aurelia Packet and Times, in his nearly 4 decades in journalism, he has covered baseball, hockey, more than 10 Olympic Games, more than 10 in addition to countless world championships. Uncle Milty, as he is affectionately known around stadiums across North America, has covered the Ticats for decades and was inducted into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. That was back in 2012. In addition, he's been called one of the most influential figure skating journalists in the country and was inducted into the Skate Canada Hall of Fame in 2017. He's authored more than 24 books. Hey, and on top of all that, he's a proud father and grandfather, and I'm fortunate enough to call him my friend. And Milty, one of the best mentors I've ever had in this business.
Well, let's not play that up too much, Louie. I think I've learned more from you in the last few years than you've ever learned from me.
Like I said, we wrote a bunch of books, including a new second edition of the Hall of Fame Book of Jerseys. This is a part of a partnership. You've written a couple of books for the Hall of Fame. Three. The toughest I ever faced. I had that one out over Christmas. People flipping through that one. And again, you've written dozens of books. Milty, I really appreciate you doing this. Bittersweet to have you on the show as it is now.
First day of the rest of my life.
First day of the rest of your life, and you're spending it with me. I'm truly honored. That column last week, how difficult was that for you to write?
Brutal.
Yeah.
I think the first line and the last line said it all. How do you do this? How do you actually say goodbye in a short period of time? And thank you? That was the biggest thing. How do you thank people? And because there are so many, hundreds of them, but essentially it comes down to the people that read you every day, because that's what writing is about, is being read. It's what music is about, is being heard, that kind of thing, as was in the column.
Well, you always told me that you respond to every email.
Everyone.
Every single email.
I may have missed one or two,
good or
if I
bad,
have, I apologize.
Good or bad, but you always felt that if someone was taking the time to email you, not write an anonymous thing, not comment on Twitter.
I don't look at social media that much. I mean, I look at them, but I never respond.
So, I mean, good or bad, you responded to basically everybody. Why was that important to you?
Because people care enough to write, care enough to not to hide behind pseudonyms or whatever handles and all of those kinds of things. And if they write, they care enough to put it to execute it. It takes time to sit down, and it takes some balls to write to somebody
to call somebody out.
Yeah, to call somebody out, or to even say, "Hey, I just want to let you know." And there used to be an old formula in newspapers that for every letter to the editor, there are 100 people that feel the same way. Right, so I think that was the number we used to use in the old days, and so therefore, other people were feeling one way or the other about that. Why I didn't do it on social media is because it's undefeated. Right, you cannot win on social media. Eventually, something comes around, because they all have a second life, right? So negative, and it's important not to get too high and not to get too low, which can happen to you if you fall. Many athletes will tell you that too. They try not to. I mean, they do. They know kind of what's going on, but they try not to get too high. They try not to get too low, because if you get confused by either one of those extremes.
You were a pretty good athlete yourself growing up, despite your stature.
Well, I was going to say that's God's practical joke, right?
Despite your stature, Milty.
Makes you 5'6" and then shrinks you for the rest of your life.
You played football out in London. You've how important did that set you up for your career? Would you have been a sports writer had you not?
Well, I was fortunate enough to go to high school. It was pretty oriented to two things: music and sports. And it was a brand new high school. It was an experimental sort of high school. Still exists. It's actually the school that Rob Ford was coaching at when he hit the guy.
Oh,
remember when it was Newtonbrook, but long after. I mean, Rob was much younger than I am, but it was a good school that way. And a lot of us still have contact with each other. There's probably 200 or 300 people from the 60s that still know each other. And we have an event every year, and 50 or 60 people go. And a lot of people I haven't seen for a long time say, well, that makes sense. You wrote poems when you were at school and you played sports. It makes sense you're a sports writer. But it was very accidental how I never, ever wanted to do that. I wanted to be president of IBM. And then the 60s hit.
So you went to school, you went to Western.
Yeah.
You went to Western for business.
Right. And the way it's set up, I think it's still set up the same way as the Ivy School of Business is once you do pre-business for a couple. It's a bit like meds that way, and you have to qualify. And I think at my time there might have been 800, and I would say of those 800, probably 780 were men, given that it was 1967 when I went there. And then if you had high enough marks, you got in. And I had high enough marks, but by then, you can imagine, it was 1969. And a lot of things had changed in the world. You know, the 60s didn't really come to Canada till the very end, and now we're at Woodstock. I mean, it's the summer of Woodstock. I'm going to business school when Woodstock is coming. I don't think so. so, and all the protests and the Vietnam things. I had teachers, and so I morphed into history, and eventually started a master's at one point. But I didn't. I always said about going into the academic career, if I'm going to get stabbed, I want to be stabbed in the front. I don't want to be stabbed in the back. And that's, if anybody knows anything about academia, higher levels of it, it's a brutal thing. And I came from a world of confrontation. I want the confrontation face to face.
Didn't it? I mean, so you're talking about that. You're talking about history. You're talking. I mean, like getting stabbed in the back. As somebody who appreciates history, what does it mean? And we're going to get to this a little bit later on. But to see what's happened to newspaper, like you are a victim of a declining newspaper industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a specific situation, and I'm not really going to speak to it other than what I said. I have been terminated. I mean, everybody knows that. It was all part of the bankruptcy thing that affected this area as much as any part.
Niagara this week.
All the Niagara parts and going north and into Halton and all of those kinds of things. And I mean, the history shows us that why I went into history was that in the mid-'60s we were starting to use what was called first sources. We didn't, like, you went to the newspapers of the time to find, because that's what we call history on the fly, right? And we talk about that in the newspaper business all the time. It's the Daily Miracle. It's the first draft of history that day, and you revise it and you revise it and revise it. But I found myself poring over microfilms from 1880, looking at let's say the Geneva Convention, which is where women's lib started, I think, in 1845. That was actually my major, was women's issues in Canada and the United States, and social issues and cultural issues. And I found myself poring over those things. And like everybody else that is curious, I've been a newspaper guy all my life in terms of reading them and all of those kinds of things. I learned to read. On Milt Donald's column. There used to be a little thing at the bottom, and that's why I started doing it near the end of my time at the Spectator. Little notes in boldface with a name, right? Because I could handle that at the age of 7, and it was something I was interested in. Here's a one little note about Frank Mahovich with a boldface. Couldn't read the whole column. I had no idea what was going on, but those little things at the end, I think they were called thumbnail tales. And Steve Simmons does a really good job of that. He does hundreds of them every week. And it was based on that, too. I'm pretty sure when I talked to Cy about that. So I found that newspapers gave an idea of the temperature at the time. And it's a back and forth thing. We set the agenda. We also follow the agenda that people try to put out for us. And News Now, like, we're all together now in all of this. There's not the distinction between broadcast, electronic, digital, and print that there once was. We're all meshed together now, and we're all in it. Obviously, we're all in it. They're private industries. That's part of it. That's the number one thing that's got to survive. But really, we're all in it for. There's a thing that in newspapers called afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, right? That's the New York Times. And
New York Times launched Democracy Dies in Darkness.
That's
Washington
right.
Post, I think, might be that one.
That was the Washington. And it's true. It's 100% true. Now, sometimes we go a little far in newspapers, and any news, or do we get controlled by producers and by editors who want the hot button issues? Yes, we do. And it's getting worse. And that bothers me, because hot button issues are that. And I don't want to say only that, because they do give you some idea of the temperature of what people are feeling. But part of what we should be doing is investigating things more and what's behind the hot button issues and what is the future of democracy. One of the things that I've been party to, and as a jock, the toy department, the fun and games department, even there, it makes some difference. Even there, it makes some difference that if people privatize their companies and you can't get at them and you can't, I mean, you go around the hockey now and it's all scrums and it's controlled messages. And if I had a .ca for a company that was running a hockey or a football or a baseball, I'd do the same thing too. Why wouldn't I want to control my message? I think there's a real danger in that. Well, you extend that to the larger issues like the environment, who gets money and who doesn't. And it's no surprise to me that when there was less communication, which really came along in the pandemic because we couldn't get out and talk to people as much as we used to be able to, not on site, we'd do it by phone, and they can phone back or not phone back or BS you on the...
You could have said it. You could have said it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I will next time.
Now you know.
And there was a real decline there, and the offense has been put up, and you don't know who's doing what. And don't even get me started on AI and where that might lead, and it will lead there in a hurry. You don't know. I don't like this. I have a news feed, and they send me stuff because I read an article once on one thing, right? And they send me all that kind of stuff. Here's the news you want to read about. How do I know what I want to read about? That's the wonderful thing. I've always said that if newspapers started after the internet, they'd be successful, because you go, wow, look at these people. They take everything, they curate it, they give us a little bit of this or that or the other thing. I don't know if I want to read about why shoes are harder to buy these days.
Yeah,
I would never even think of that until there's an article on it, right? And I've been party to, luckily, even as a jock, every few days I drop in on the, or past tense now, the news meetings, where every single day, people with real brains and real heart and real guts, and that's most journalists, whatever milieu you're in, good journalists, professional journalists, discuss in some form or another, what is freedom of speech? Where does it go? And what's the value of it? And it happens every single day. So when you hear people, and I don't need to tell you who, but it's coming to this country too, it already is here, dismiss woke media or mainstream media as a meme, as some kind of like slogan for something that it does not in any way stand for, it really bothers me because it's so easy to dismiss it.
It bothers.
We think about it every single day.
It bothers you. Does it scare you?
Beyond belief.
How do we fix it?
I don't know.
We don't. I mean, we don't. You and I are.
You be critical.
jocks.
You try to be critical. The problem with this is,
they're so loud. Those who are yelling are so loud and take up so much of the air in the room that it's even hard to get legitimate messages out, though.
Well, and that's part of, we are to blame for this partly because we go to those loud people. Like I can remember having a discussion one time. They said, well, you got to get this person talking. It wasn't even my story. Yeah. And I pipe up and say, why? It's a lunatic.
Yeah.
Well, we got to give them equal. Why?
Two sides, right? Not every story has two sides.
Well, and if they do, they're not equal.
Okay.
Like every coin has a head and a tail.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as flipping it all the time where over time that's going to be equal. That doesn't equalize out. If you're an idiot, if you have idiotic views, if you have views that are harmful, it's the difference between freedom of speech and license. And license, I mean, in most constitutions, since the Magna Carta, there's been some kind of differentiation between freedom of speech and license. And license is the freedom to say anything. And somehow we've come to believe that that's okay. It isn't okay because it can be harmful. Especially if you can't trace the source.
Let's get back to sports.
Yep. That's about all I got with politics.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your insights. And like I said, you made a point to write it in your farewell column the way you feel like the downside of what's been happening to the news business and the effect it's having, and the very real effect it's having, and the fact you mentioned that it is coming to Canada. There is signs of it. There are news denialism.
Can I say one more thing?
Go for it.
And that's young people. And I consider you a young person.
Oh, thank you.
I'm very encouraged by the people in the business and their dedication for it, because this will happen after 3 or 4 generations into a certain kind of thing. You should be getting better. All of us should be getting better. I think I was better than some of the people before me because I stood on their shoulders, and you have too. And the people that work behind the scenes here, and the young people they have at the Spectator, very dedicated, and go hard and work their cans off for things. So I've got some encouragement there. If anything can happen, it's going to be from that group.
Yeah. How did you get into sports then? How does a poet, hippie,
well, I was a jock.
player...
Let's not forget that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, all right.
So,
Listen, I was trying to soften you up a bit.
And then God's practical joke gives you a love for big men sport and makes you 5'6", and then continues to shrink you the rest of your life. So I did everything I could there.
You're running back, right?
Running back, and then I went,
DB?
Played in the junior leagues, the ORFU, and had, decent okay, did okay, and then played. There used to be a league between the University League and the CFL back when there were more Canadian positions, and I played for the London Lords, who were the farm team because of the area that we're in of the Ticats. In fact, one of the guys on our team was a Ticat who ended up making the Hall of Fame. Glenn Weir for defensive tackle but he made it for Montreal. Yeah. Bad trade. Bad trade by Hamilton in 1970. He was playing for us when he got traded.
Yeah,
they were good players. Most of the players had at least several had played. They were either on their way up or on the way down. Some of us were just kind of fillers, But I got to play on that team. Yeah. It was a good team. We drew fans. They were trying to get a NFL or CFL team in London, and so they did everything for us. We got paid. It helped put food every year we started in August. From August to November, that's how I ate. When I was going to university, I didn't have any money by then. And so it was really, really, really good. And then the league folded. We were the last champions there. And then I moved to Huntsville. And I had sort of 3 careers before I got into newspapers. I started as a social worker. Then I moved to Huntsville to work in retail. And then my mom was going to buy a store up there, which is now the main pub in Huntsville. And had we figured out that you could do a pub, I'd still be there. I never would have gotten into newspapers. And then I started a little cleaning company because by then I'd fallen in love with the little town of Huntsville. And I thought it was a great place to live. So I had a cleaning company that contract cleaning at, Kimberly-Clark and those kinds of things. So one of the managers at Kimberly-Clark, which was a great big paper mill, where I cleaned, his wife owned one of the town newspapers, and I used to complain to him all the time about the sports and how awful they were. They had this great junior B.
As you're cleaning his office.
As I'm cleaning, I'm saying, come on, tell your wife, blah, 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 blah. And one day he came to me after about a year of this, and he says, you got such a big mouth. Why don't you try it? So I worked 1 day a week on Mondays and did all my cleaning at night and wrote sports by hand. And then I'd type it out at the newspaper. And the next week they said, do you want to work here full time? So I would work 9 to 5 there and pay, if I had a day job, which I did, cleaning, I'd pay somebody to do that. And then I'd go at night and work at the cleaning company and that kind of thing. And the third week, this is how small the paper was, they said, do you want to be editor? Louie, I didn't know how many W's there were. I still don't know how many W's there are. I never went to J school. There's lots of times people phone me and say, what was the score of that game? Yeah. I don't know. I forgot to put it in.
Oh,
so it was all because I was more of a writer than a reporter, and I still am not that great a reporter. I'm not Radley, who's a really good reporter.
My story on the PWHL yesterday didn't mention the score at all. I realized that watching it back. I was like, I guess I didn't really say who won that game at all.
Well, we were looking at something different. Both of us were looking at the same thing when we were at that. We were looking at the momentous occasion that was there. I mean, as I've told you many times before, I live by symbols, and yesterday is one of the most symbolic days of my adult life, at least professional life, because it was something I'd been looking forward to. The first women's hockey game I covered was in the 70s, the Huntsville Honeys, and they were 14 years old, right? And I didn't even, but before that, I paid attention because my girlfriend's sister had played at Guelph in the 60s. And
you were telling me Hazel McCallion was a pro hockey player.
It's funny. Fran Ryder is the sort of the root and the anchor now of women's hockey in Ontario and Canada. Like, she was there yesterday in that VIP room where Brian Burke was there and Stan Casson, I mean, big players were at that game. There was some heavy people there from the sports industry. And she's always said, Fran Ryder, who's head of the Ontario Women's Hockey Association, has always said that, we're making a mistake here saying this is the first women's pro league. It's the first women's pro league that's had adequate funding. That we never put that little thing at the end there, and that's why we all have encouragement about it. It's not the first women's pro league. There's been at least 2 or 3 before that. And Hazel McCallion in the 40s played for a women's team that was pro. I mean, you were talking 1942, and she was getting $5 a game. What's that today?
That's not bad. Per game, yeah.
Well, that's
like per week.
That's $1,000 at least today in the 40s. So it was professional, and of course, like anything else that developed during the 40s, when women actually took these great strides forward because of the war. When the men came back from the war, right, and that
League
of their own, a league of our own,
league of their own. Let's go back to yesterday, because you and I obviously saw each other there, and you mentioned it in your farewell column. What was the significance of yesterday? You mean it's not the first pro league
tipping point
for what?
Tipping point. All social movements, all economic movements, actually happen before they actually get going here. It's been pretty clear now it's important and maybe profitable, and that's how you have to sell things to move into women's sports. The turning point has happened. There have been other turning points in other sports, and most the WNBA, that's a whole different thing, because that was still the men kind of giving them something. Yeah. And I guess that you could say the same thing about soccer, but when there was the NWSL, that was something. But when the highly misogynistic nations of Europe, and believe me, they are, particularly the ones with state religions, Spain, England, when they flipped and saw, wow, this could be something. So the rise of the British Women's Soccer League and the Spanish Women's Soccer League, with the money behind it, has changed that scene. So now it comes over to hockey. We've all been waiting for the unification, and you were in on Jana Hefford's press conference yesterday, and she said something quite significant, where she said, we don't consider ourselves the first pro league. We consider ourselves as the first league now where everybody's going to make adequate money, and over time they'll make money. I think the minimum, what's
35?
Yeah, 35
is the minimum. It's at least 6 players making north of $80,000.
$80,000. That doesn't sound like a lot now, but there'll be endorsements and all of those kinds of things, and they get treated. You saw that people who were there. Every single person who works in the organization is professional at what they do, and they emphasize that. Well, Jana said, look, we're no longer in competition with those leagues, but those were the ones that got us going. All the original incarnations of the pro league, even the PHF, which they essentially bought and folded, she said we couldn't be here without them. And I really thought that was intelligent. You don't hear that, frankly, in the men's leagues. You really don't.
And Stan had the great point, too, about the international buy-in.
That's right.
12 different countries representing. It's not just Canadians.
There's not enough of them.
Not enough.
There's only one player yesterday.
Out of the 157 players in the league, they are represented by 12 countries.
And we need
97 Canadians, 40 Americans. Like it's very few, but this is a good first step.
And we can't apologize if you're a Canadian or
the rivalry series.
Yeah, you can't apologize for that.
Yeah.
You can't apologize for getting better.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's obscured that many of these other leagues or other countries have got a lot better. At the Worlds this year in Brampton, which was played in the shadow of Hazel McCallion's death, right? And she was basically, she was Brampton.
Yeah,
she was Brampton.
Yeah,
and Mississauga. Well, she was Mississauga, but there, watching Japan. It was enjoyable to watch Japan and Switzerland. They gave some of the best moments, but the gap is actually larger now than it used to be, even though they're way better. You compare Japan and Switzerland the way they are right now, Sweden, to 5 years ago, and they're exponentially better. It's just that Canada and the U.S., by playing each other and getting better and better, and the depth that they have and getting more, they have widened that gap. And it's not because these other teams have gotten worse. I like to point out that 1990 was the first Worlds, official Worlds, and so what are we at now? 32 Worlds or something like that. So go to the men and see where they were at 32 years after. Poland was getting beaten 23-2 East Germany was getting beaten 52-1. Like take a little look at history.
8-1 doesn't look so bad after the fact.
Actually
We're not getting shut out.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
The depth is, there's some really good players. There's just not enough of them. Like Japan had 6 great players. Switzerland had 6 great,
Can't make a competitive team.
You can't.
Yeah.
Because you will always make it close for 2 periods and then get beaten.
Yeah. Let's switch gears to football.
Yeah.
Obviously, long time. That's where you and I met.
Oh, for sure.
You and
How many times did we?
You and I go back. TSN 1150, another defunct. We started there. You were a co-host of Marsh and Milton. Obviously,
It sounded like something like from Marsh and Milton.
I had to think about it. Marsh and Milton. I was producer Louie B.
Like what, you were like 12 or something?
I felt 12, yeah. But the Ticats, you have seen this team through some pretty interesting moments.
Yeah.
You made a special note of pointing out what Bob Young and in turn Scott Mitchell, Matt Affinick have been able to accomplish with this team. Through the stadium stuff, through everything, did you ever think that we would have been where we were just a few months ago at the Grey Cup?
No.
Why not?
I didn't think that you could turn it into that profitable enough of a business. Well, first of all, we didn't know if the league was going to survive. Take a look at where the Ticats and the Argos were in exactly the same place in 2003, both bankrupt, and look since then. One team is making money now and is setting the template for how it gets their own. Now, they both got new stadium, the stadia. That makes some difference. And it's the difference between commitment and going brick by building something brick by brick. Bob made a lot of mistakes, and his early people made a lot of mistakes early. But he should be forgiven for that, and who didn't forgive him? Because, A, they were bankrupt. They went from a staff of it was a skeletal staff being run by the league of 12 total.
To the 150
and they had to do it
coworkers I
overnight.
used to have,
So, of course, you're going to have some things that don't go quite right. But I'll tell you something about the Tiger Cats. And this isn't to kiss their ass, but they learn from their mistakes as well as any organization I've ever seen in my life. Well,
how so?
They'll
like the PR battle. Like, I mean, and again, I might get in trouble for talking, but the PR battle around the stadium, like that what do you think they learned from that?
I think they learned that people take some things more seriously than you recognize. So what is it that they take seriously? I think some people felt they, maybe weren't being listened to a little bit there, and now the Ticats almost over-listen to their fans. I think they learned the value of not over-committing to something at the start. And here's the thing about that stadium. They didn't know where it was going to go. They realized they were in changing times. They knew they wanted to do that social viewing thing. They were the first ones. And even though it looked like Ottawa was first in Canada, they got the idea from looking at the Ticats plans in 2012 when they built the stadium with some social viewing. The U.S. had done it for a while. Mm-hmm. And I remember Matt Affinick talking about that kind of thing. So they kept it open because they didn't want to lock themselves. There were a lot of empty spaces in that stadium, partly by the screw-ups of the building of the stadium, none of which were the Ticats' fault.
No.
None of that was. That was the contractor, right? Which went out of business, right? So,
we're talking about speakers falling from the sky.
Yeah, that kind of
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there were 1,000 things, but it's one of the greatest places. It feels like home to me in that place.
Absolutely,
it's evolved. They've allowed it to evolve by not over-imposing their vision on it, because they knew their vision would be organic. The things would grow. There were a lot of empty spaces there for a long time. They didn't fill them because they didn't want to lock into filling them. And sometimes they'll take things and like for instance when they used to be able to sit on the field. Well, it was a better deal. It was more intimate and actually far more profitable if they had those electric signs there. So you no longer sit on the field. But the Grey Cup, for instance, their original plans for this one, the full Grey Cup, was modified by watching what the NHL did. With the
Winter Classic.
With the Winter Classic and how it intimates. And they listened to TSN, where TSN says, we want a little more of a bowl effect so that it focuses it on the game itself. And I thought the way the Grey Cup Stadium was set up was tremendous.
Yeah, a lot of good things to say. Other than
they changed their mind on it. They changed their mind several times on it.
Well, you look at where the original plans were. The halftime show was going to be across the street at Party Poloni. Like it was really well done. Where can the Cats go from here, other than win a Grey Cup? Like what? I mean, there's the Hamilton Sports Group with Forge FC.
They help with the rest of the league. That's where they go, and they're doing that. I mean, obviously, Scott Mitchell, Bob Young, I would put them as a tandem, the number 2 most powerful sports people in this country behind MLSE. I don't think anybody's third after those two. I really
MLSB, HSG / CSB too, right?
Yeah,
Canada Sport Soccer Business.
And individuals involved with Scott because of the, I mean, they're powerful internationally, which the Leafs really aren't, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. This group is...
You have the CONCACAF president.
Given the CONCACAF,
You have Victor Montagliani probably on speed dial, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And that stadium started a whole new league. We've written about that extensively. The growth is in the soccer. The money right now is in the football. But the growth is in the soccer, and because it's still a long way from what it could be, and I think what it's going to be. A lot of people run it down because of what's happened with Canada Soccer and the men's team, and they dumped on idols from great heights, and that was a huge mistake. Don't be ever doing that again. Don't take. You can be right and they were. Everything they said, there was nothing wrong. There was nothing unfactual about what they said.
Nobody wanted to put Canada Soccer on TV.
That's right.
5 years ago.
That's right.
You couldn't pay them to.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It was a good deal at the time, and everybody knows it. But you don't have to make that point when people who have taken soccer to a place where it never was.
Country,
yeah. Starting with Christine and her group and her team, which I was fortunate to be part of that in London, and that's what flipped me on soccer was that team, the greatest women's game ever played at
1-0. Is that the U.S.?
No, the 4-3 game.
Oh, 4-3.
Where Christine got the 3 goals and couldn't and had to leave the next game. I mean, that was one of the greatest 5 days I've ever been involved in sports, and the things I've seen live, probably top 5. Oh, it's top 5.
Okay, let's go through. Let's go through it. I'm going to put you on the spot here because one of my favorite stories from you is you used to take game notes for Blue Jays World Series, filling out your scorecard. It's unfinished.
Right. That was the Carter home run. Two things happened on the Saturday night in Georgia when they won for the first time. I had every single box. I did a lot of games that year. I probably did 125 games that year. And the games I didn't do, I would cut the box score and running out of the newspaper box score and put it in. And then I had all of my notes and the little things that say what's what. And I left it in the press box. And in the hurry to get down to talk to the first team, not from the United States, to win the World Series. Yeah. And it was incredible. The next year,
so you never got that back?
I never got it back.
You never saw it?
Never got it again. I discovered about 5 or 6 years ago, I was going through some things, and I found the same book from the next year, which was, for those of you that are too young, when the Jays won their second World Series in 1993, on the Joe Carter home run. Everybody has their own way of scoring, right? And there's a thing, runners in scoring position. We didn't have quite the metrics, but a lot of us had our own metrics. And everybody scored the game differently. Mm. And my thing was when there was a runner in scoring position, I used different colored pencils. So if there's a runner in scoring position when a guy was at bat, you'd surround that little box beside his name in that inning in red. And if there were more than one, if there were 2, then you put it in green. I found that thing the other day, and here's Joe Carter's name, surrounded in green because there was 2 runners in scoring position at the time, empty. Because I didn't put the last entry in because you're running down to see Joe Carter. You want to be part of it. It's still empty. It was never completed. But it wasn't my number 1.
What's number 1?
This one relates to a number of things. I went to a really good track school, really, really good. We ran at the old armories. We ran at the Spec indoor games. Before they were the Spec indoor games. They were running the armories back in the 60s. And we had a great relay team, sort of offset caliber, all of that kind. One undefeated one year. And so my greatest one was Saturday night in Georgia. I'm sitting up on the very high in the stadium in Atlanta. And remember, the United States had never lost a 4x100 men's relay in which they'd finished, in which they hadn't either been disqualified for being over the line or dropped the baton. I think 2 or 3 times that. Yeah. They had never lost.
They never lost.
Never lost.
To another team. They beat themselves.
That's right. Yeah. So, and there was a lot of chirping that week, all week about it. And the great thing was Donovan Bailey had won the 100 the week before, and he immediately, as soon as he got, had his couple of days of personal glory, then took on the team and became an incredible team thing. So here's all these team guys, with Robert Esme and people like that, Bernie Surin, and they're really a team. And the Americans, of course, can't even decide that, Carl Lewis decides he wants to be on the team. So it's chirping all week. And guys like John Drummond, all of them, except for Carl, had raced in the Hamilton Spectator indoor games, which I covered every single one of them and talked to every one of them. It was great. And so now it starts, and Canada is on the inside, one lane inside. And for people that don't know relays, there's a stagger in a 4x100. So you start way behind if you're on one of the inside because you're shorter circle. The circumference is shorter. That is made up on the third turn. It's equal there. Then it's a turn and straight.
Straight, yeah. The last 100 meters.
Bruni hands off to Donovan. And I thought I had the wrong lane because they're up about 3. And I get goosebumps to this moment thinking about it. Bruni just puts his hands up in the air as it's a clean pass. Just puts his hands up in the air, and they would have set a world record, except Donovan does this at the cost, and it cost him a step, and it probably cost him the world record. But that is my number one memory. We're talking about things I was at now, not that I necessarily seen.
What was the
number 2 would be Joe catching the ball at first base for the first, and does the same jump.
He does, as he's coming around.
Does the same jump in the same spot, and then the next year. But part of that was Tom Cheek, who was a close friend, because he lived here in Burlington. I lived in Burlington at the time. He drove me home almost every night from the airport at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning to Burlington, and knew my kids and those kinds of things. Tom Cheek just hated the fact that he didn't have a call, like a signature call. He said, I had time. I could have thought about this. And I never really had a good call. I didn't see it on TV. I don't even know what he said. So he said, but he moaned about it a lot. Well, now, fast forward to the next year. No way you can prepare for that. So Tom had time to prepare and lamented. No way you can prepare for Joe hitting that home run, especially on that kind of pitch, because he couldn't hit that pitch. That's the kind of pitch that used to get him out. Yeah. And he comes up with the second greatest call in Canadian sports history, number 1 being Henderson has scored for Canada.
Yeah, I right up there.
So that's number 3. Number 4 would be.
Were you at the 2010? Vancouver?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was there at 2010. Do you mean the men's or the
women? I mean the double, right? I mean the women, cigars, all that stuff on the ice, having a good time.
Saw all that and the Crosby goal.
Team,
Crosby, that's a little lower actually.
Really?
I have the goal in Russia because that game was over. It was 2-0 United States with 4 or 5. This is against the women, right? And the Americans are just, and then Canada scored. I can't remember who got the goal to make it 2-1, and then they pull their goalie, and the Americans shoot the puck down the ice. I don't know. I can still see that puck. And it's heading towards the empty net. And the last second, it was like an out-turn in curling. It made a little thing and just missed the post, and it was icing. Even the Americans knew what was going to happen next. Poulin scores to put it into overtime. Then they get into overtime. And Hayley Wickenheiser, who was hinting that this was her last Olympics, so this would have been her last play, has a breakaway. She gets pulled down. It should have been a penalty shot, but they make it a 4-on-3. So what would have happened is Hayley Wickenheiser would have had a penalty shot to win the Olympics, and what at the time we thought was going, maybe many of us thought, she didn't think it, but so it becomes a power play. And they have Laura Fortino from Hamilton is playing, and she gets the puck on the right-hand side. And I can hear from where I'm sitting at about the same angle that I watched the Crosby goal from, about the same angle. And I can hear everybody on the bench yelling, shoot it, shoot it, shoot it. And she passes. She's the only one that can see that Poulin is wide open. And it goes in, and the place goes crazy.
Yeah.
So, and I have another women's game in there, too. Obviously, the 4-3 game with Christine Sinclair. You have to combine that with the next game because they were so devastated, and yet...
They still won the bronze, right?
They should have won the game against the United States and should have lost to France. They never got out of their own end. And then Diana scores. I've always said that Diana was facing the wrong way, Diana Matheson, when she scored that goal. She was facing the wrong way. The cameras were here and got her from behind. If they had been on the other side, that would have been one of the most iconic pictures in the history of Canadian sports, her being lifted up by, I think, Rianne Wilkinson at the time, yeah.
Speaking of women's sports, obviously women's, not just women's sports, but figure skating has been a big, huge part of your life.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you were inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2017. What was that moment like? Because you had dedicated, 30-plus years of your career. And I don't want to make this about you. It is your podcast, but I know how uncomfortable that's going to make you. But that moment in 2017 to be recognized by Skate Canada for your contributions to the game, what did that mean? Yeah.
There's only 3 writers in the Canadian Figure Skating Hall of Fame. And you don't go into a writer's wing like you do in football and hockey and baseball. No. You're in the Hall of Fame as a builder. And so that meant a lot. It meant a lot because most of the people that would have had a lot to do with me getting in there in the early years, because nobody was doing figure skating at the time. I was freelancing because of Brian Orser, and I was living in Orillia. I was following him all over the world and writing, freelancing about all the other people on the team, to the Cambridge paper, to the paper in Port, somewhere in Port Alberni, BC. That's how I financed them for years and years and years.
So it's just a skater from this local town.
Yeah, and I'd write about him, and nobody else was going to do it.
Yeah.
And I was also doing a lot of Canadian press stuff at the time because they weren't sending anybody on the road. But but nobody was just covering it. And one of the things that I think I was always able to do, and I think I do the same with the Ticats too, I'm not really an inside football guy, not really an inside baseball guy. You're sort of explaining to everybody without offending people who are really into the game. And in terms they can understand. I mean, that's what we do in newspapers. We take some scientific thing, we boil it all down, and we come up with a story that the average person can understand why it's important, this cancer treatment that they're doing, all right? But we have to digest all that kind of stuff. We'll do the same in figure skating and translate it into something that people could understand. So it was especially important in 79, 80. I have a book in mind I wasn't going to write, but I think I may have to do it financially now.
You got the time, why not?
Yeah, I got the time and I need the money. That's pretty well the 2 big motivations, right? So is the second golden age of Canadian figure skating, which started basically in the early 80s, and I came along right then.
Yeah.
I came along in the late 70s when they were finishing 6th and great skaters, but they didn't have the resources. Nobody knew how to run things. I came when they changed everything, the Team Canada concept, all of that kind of stuff. And it started with a medal in 1982 in the men's, and it never really ended until, I don't even know if we're probably out of it, but 2018, it peaked in 2018 when we finally had a women's champion for the first time in how many years? Since the early 60s. And all the men's champions, when Brian won in 1987 in Cincinnati, that's right, just after I came to the Spectator, that was the first men's world championship Canada had won since 1965. 20 some odd years. And we've never had a gap like that. I think the greatest gap we've had since then is 5 years.
You brought up, does Hamilton get the respect it deserves as a sports city?
No, not at all. I think we're starting to a little bit, and it's amazing. I mean, that's one of the things I've seen in my time is that we always had some hockey players, but look, we've got a world-class golfer now. We've got
NBA
2 or 3
like that. Because and we say this as somebody who had a platform to talk about sports. And the one thing I've said about 1050 or 1150, excuse me, that if it was 5 years later, that place could have been something real special.
Yeah.
And not to say I don't have great memories of our time there or the experience there, but I just think of the Hamilton market being so underserved by the great stories that need to be told, and being even more underserved, Milty, if you don't mind me saying, by the fact that you're not writing for the Spectator, because it's not just the big stars, it's the Golden Horseshoe Athlete of the Years.
That's how they get there. It's the people that put them together. I'm a big thing on coaches and teachers and
Nathan Rourke, Burlington Stampeder. I mean, this Golden Horseshoe has produced so much.
Unbelievable, and I think it's only going to get better, particularly NBA, but also the kind of players that we're producing for the NHL now, like scorers and we've always had Andy, like Andrew Chuck and guys like that. But I mean, you take a look in the last few years with Ryan Ellis. That's real. My heart breaks for Ryan and his injury, because he He was something else. I mean, when they won the World Juniors, when Pat Quinn was coaching, which debunked all the rumors he couldn't work with young people.
Hamiltonian.
It was Ryan Ellis that made the play.
Yeah.
They were trying to clear the puck, and he jumped up and stopped it, and that's led to Jordan Eberle, right? Yeah. But he made the play, and you look at I mean, I count Burlington as the Hamilton area, but you look at the players coming out of there, and there's just so many really, really good players. And here's the problem, and I didn't really figure it out because I was new to Hamilton. As soon as I got here, I spent 9 months at the Burlington Spectator, and then I went on the road. So I didn't really, I was only in Hamilton in the winter times, and that's where I got to do a lot of, because then I could do some high school stuff and see all those kinds of, basically, I was on the road from February until start of November. With spring, all that stuff with the Jays. But I started to notice certain things that remind me of Hamilton, and the two places that reminded me of Hamilton were Milwaukee and Oakland. Why? Because they're in the shadow of another huge city. Like almost the same kind of thing, right? Industrial towns in the shadow of Chicago and San Francisco. And we're in the shadow of Toronto. And that's one of the reasons we don't get our own thing. It's one of the problems with, CHCH, Spec, radio stations, but we're owned outside the city, right? And part of it is that the shadow cast by that larger city is felt in two ways. It creates a chip on the shoulder in the blue-collar towns who are in that shadow.
What? Hamilton has a chip on their shoulder? What, Milton?
That's not a chip.
It's news to me.
But Oakland's the same.
Yeah.
Milwaukee's the same. And some great things happen in sports there. I mean, Oakland, for the better part of 4 decades, has been a better sports town than San Francisco. Milwaukee, not so much with Chicago because they have so many teams, but it's quite noticeable. And that's part of the reason why we don't get the respect. And part of it is just the way things are changing. A lot of, like, if you take a guy like Shea, right, or even that quarterback, what's his name, that ended up in Mississauga. They might play a couple of years of high school ball here. Yeah. And then that's the way it is. In basketball, hockey, and not hockey so much, well, it isn't hockey. It's always been that way. You have to go away to play junior. You don't get to usually play for your hometown. But certainly in basketball and in football, academies are soaking up all. I mean, that's a two-way street in a way because so maybe let's say McNabb might lose two top football players, or Cathedral loses a couple of basketball players, but that means 2 other players at the bottom end get to play. Yeah. Get to play, and that's part of it. You don't recognize them necessarily as being high school people here because maybe they're playing somewhere in Connecticut for their last 2 years of high school. You kind of lose track of them, right? Radley does a really good job of trying to keep track of those people. Yeah. He does them when they're young, and then we kind of especially over the last 2 years when we did the notes columns, we tried to track them at least once a couple of months. Say, hey, remember this guy or this woman? We did that with Emma Maltese, right? Yep. So we tracked her pretty strongly all the way through Ohio State. Yeah,
and there she was yesterday. Lot of great local.
She's suddenly the number 1 player on that team.
Yeah.
She threw those 2 hits in the third period, and suddenly she's the favorite player of that.
Oh, I was going through that list too of like the players and players who have played. We talked about the Stony Creek Sabres, just a huge women's hocky factory there.
Oh, for sure.
In terms, Milton's got a great team as well, right?
Right, and some the one from Victoria Bach, who was on the reserve list. Mm-hmm. She played in Milton, but people forget that she's actually was one of the when they started the program 3 or 4 years ago of having really high-end instructors for their skill session. Victoria's one of them.
Hamilton as a sports city. What about Hamilton as a city? You've seen this city grow. You've seen the development. You know the issues that the city is facing. Are you encouraged in terms of the future of Hamilton? Does it need some work? How do you see
as you know, I'm a hippie and a bit left-wing.
I might come shock to some of our viewers and listeners. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I make no bones about it. I've written about this forever. I don't apologize for being who I am that way and the way I grew up and making changes in my life that go along with that kind of thing. But it's a tough place to do business. Because it doesn't matter who's on city council, there's always resistance. And it doesn't matter Doesn't matter who it is. It's just the history of it. And I think that comes from the chip on the shoulder thing. That the people kind of, like if it's, a lot of the politicians, fed by their constituents. Mm-hmm. I mean, politicians don't pull things out of the air. They listen to the people, and that's sometimes the noisy majority. And it's difficult to get things done. And I know we saw the classic case was Michelangelo, right? A classic case was the stadium. How did that end up into a stalemate, right? Into a place that nobody wanted that stadium to go where it ended, where it was. I always said about that, look, Ticats tried to make money. If any of those other proposals that the city were talking about were the right thing for them financially, they would have done it. They were in it to thrive. So I had to believe them more than anybody else did because of that very reason. They aren't there to screw anybody. They didn't have any money invested in the land that they were wanting to or not go into. And when the compromise came, and it was what nobody wanted, and here's what I will say about this, that eventually the next stadium, you know where it's going to go? Exactly. There. As long as they get parking. Because now you've got Fenway Park. And you realize that this is what happened when this Fenway Park is celebrated and the old Civic Stadium was basically condemned for being exactly the same thing in a neighborhood, iconic. All of these teams that, with a great rival, New York takes the place of Toronto in Boston, those kinds of things. And Fenway, they somehow made it work. We couldn't. But I think the Ticats have found a way. Okay, we don't want to be here. We don't want to be here. But are we going to live there? We're going to live with that attitude? We're here, right? So here, let's go ahead. And that's what, there's a few people that still hang on to that. Yeah. That's fair.
It's
fair.
Even when I came in, the stadium was brand new, right? I came into the city in 2015, the year it opened, basically. And there was still that lingering effect. And some of the issues with construction were a part of that, for sure. The contractor issues, that was a part of it, the overrun costs, things like that. But it's such a, I have to think and be like, oh yeah, that was such a huge deal in this city. That was such a big fight in the city at the time. But I mean, it seems like our memories are wiped clean.
Well, not for everybody.
Really?
Every time something comes up, like, let's just choose 8 and 10 for 2 years in a row. Okay. Let's choose a Grey Cup they should have won, and it comes down to something else. Somehow, for some people, it always comes up. That's the anger that was generated back in 2011, 12, whenever they made the compromise. A lot of people still hang on to that, maybe partly because some of the same people, Scott and others, are involved, and it comes up. I never listened to it because I mean, if you're living there, I mean, that's so long ago. And take a look at what's happening here. So that's one thing about Hamilton. I think some really good things. I think the GO train coming on a regular basis now, it's changing. It's definitely going to change my life now, because if I'm running into the city to do something as a senior citizen, you can take it almost for it's almost like they pay you to take it. It's so cheap. So I'll be doing that, and you can be in and out for a few bucks and do
save the drive,
and the fact that it's on the weekend, and it changes the property value, and that changes a few things. I'm glad to see. I don't like urban sprawl. I like the idea. There's lots of brown space downtown. I think now one of the problems there is that how do you develop? We found that with the old Dom Glass, right? It's still sitting there, right? And we complain about what happens to say, Bernie Custis School, and they don't have the access to what is really the busiest outdoor stadium in Canada, is the one we have. But that was supposed to be alleviated by a park, both passive and active use at Dom Glass. Well, that's one of the problems with a lot of the city. There's clearly some poison under the ground there that they hadn't really understood, and that's that is one of the issues, is sort of the environment here. But I'm glad to see that we're not going out into the. We just came through a thing where we understood, like with the fuel prices and the cost of food in the pandemic, that it was probably good to have your food sources a lot closer to the city. So, of course, it makes sense not to plow under good farmland. To me, it seems really simple. Am I getting political here?
No. It's, I said away from sport, so I kind of set you up for that one anyway. Yeah. What's next, Milty?
Don't know. We're waiting to see.
What's that like for you?
it was a bit weird at first, but right from the start, and through this whole thing, I mean, a lot of why we've been talking lately, and people have been, contacting is because it became public that I was leaving and having to leave. But this happened really back in June when I did take a buyout, and then of course the buyout was reneged on. So I had already made up my mind to leave the Spectator. And it reminds me a little bit when you see people making movie tours, like, okay, there's a movie out now. Well, that person's already working. That actor is already working on another movie because they made this one a year ago. Well, now I'm explaining to people a lot of things that I haven't thought about for some time because I've already made that decision. Well, first thing of the decision, with the help of both my children, really strongly, was this is a new chance of some things. I didn't want to leave Spec. I don't want to leave Spec. I think it's great. I love the place. I hope only the best. It needs to survive for this city, and it needs to survive for the sake of democracy on smaller scale in the city, as the Mountain papers did, as you point out, the Niagara papers. Those are all really important to me. But I'll land somewhere. The problem is, I'm not sure what. I need to write. Writers need to write. So I'll be working on some fiction, which I have been one day a week. And even if that just means sitting in front of an empty screen, I have some things I want to say about, and I'll tell you that I've written lots on it over the last couple of years. I've only recently admitted I'm actually doing that. You'll never see this book, but I will.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll finish it in my lifetime. The idea to get it around, because it's about a couple of things, nicknames, and the Beatles. So the culture, those are the things I grew up with, right? And nobody I know doesn't have a nickname.
Yeah, Milty. Milty, you've obviously been a big part of my life the last few years.
I hope continue.
You will be. You will be. But, I'm going to blame you if I wouldn't be half the journalist I am if it wasn't for your guidance. You've given me great career advice, whether it was, through TSN, through the Ticats Audio Network, and giving me the push. You were saying that years before the Ticats Audio Network was ever a thing. You were like, that's the way it's going, that's the way it's going. So I know you're going to do great things, like more of these.
Well, we'll see. Yeah,
more of these.
You'll see. Those things, one of the things about books, so this is a dirty little secret about most books, you don't make a lot of money. I always wrote a book.
Not if you're giving them away for free to your podcast
to friends, yeah. You haven't got the bill yet. Yeah. And I always said about the books, well, we need a new dock. So,
well,
I need drywall on the cottage. So that's about what
paid for the cottage, Milty? Was it junior hockey?
The World Junior Championships. I was the only guy there in 1980. It was the Wendell Clark goal. So it was the year before it came to Hamilton. So 1985. It was New Year's Day 1985. Wendell Clark scores the goal. Canada wasn't expected to win. I had no idea. There was no internet then. Canadian Hockey Association, which is now, that was Canadian Amateur Hockey Association, saw what I was doing around figure skating in the Olympics, where I would
just
write.
Sending out.
Yeah, sending out to things. And some of them were hockey players.
Yeah.
And so that's why Canada Hockey had seen me and said, would you consider doing that if we paid your way and you travel with us and that kind of thing, and you can keep the money from the freelancing? And I said, no, it's Christmas, and it's in Finland. My wife said, yeah, but the kids are little, you might make $500. And I was making like $300 a week or something in the back. So it's 2 weeks' pay. I'll take it with two little kids at the Aurelia Packet in time. So Wendell Clark scores the goal. I have no idea what's happening back in Canada, but it's all going crazy. It's going completely crazy. I get back to my hotel, and there's an 8-hour time difference, and there's all these messages, all of them with this kind of message. You remember how we didn't want a story? Now we do. And I phoned them all, and I said, remember how it was $25? Now it's $300.
Oh, wow.
So instead of $500, we made whatever it was, and it was enough. And my wife, when I got back and collected all and the money, she took it and said, we're buying a cottage. back because we had come from Huntsville to Orillia, and we missed having a steak.
And
so.
do you still attend that cottage to this day?
Well, you know I do.
I know
I do.
I know you do. And some of those stories, listen, are not podcast appropriate.
Right.
Milty, thank you for doing this, man. I know today is the first day of your rest of your life, and you spent it
Congratulations
with me,
on this. This is a fantastic thing.
Oh, thank you.
This is a fantastic.
I didn't even pay him to say that.
No, you didn't. But you will.
I will. I will owe you soon. Steve Milton, my thanks to him for joining me. My thanks to you as well for watching or listening. However you found us, make sure to like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast, where you can catch a brand new episode of this show, that being this one, and any of the other great shows we have for you. We got a morning live recap for you. We got a brand new episode of the Trending Now podcast coming up on Friday with Nicole Martin making her podcast debut. Looking forward to that. One more time, thank you. Thanks to Mike Corson for directing this episode. And from all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko, hoping you have a great day.